and welcome to Absolutely Not. Thank y'all so much for being here today. My name is Katrina Stroll. My pronouns are they, she, he. I'm so sorry, Avery. And you can learn more about me at my website, www.katrinastroll.com. If you appreciate the work that I do here or elsewhere, please visit the Support the Mission page on my website. There are several options to choose from, so please choose one. The keywords for this episode are colorism, self-worth, and comfort. I encourage y'all to look up the definitions of these words and compare them to the definitions that you carry with you on a daily basis. If you need help comparing, please let me know. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. BetterHelp allows you to connect with one of 24,000 licensed therapists in a safe and private online environment. You pay a low flat fee for unlimited therapy with your therapist. Visit www.betterhelp.com/absolutelynot for more information and to get 10% off your first month. This link can also be found in the show notes. Today's episode is titled Quit Compromising for Comfort. Oh, and this amazing episode title is brought by my amazing special guest, Dr. Sarah L. Webb, she, her. Dr. Webb is an international speaker, consultant, and coach. She launched the global initiative, Colorism Healing, in 2013 to raise awareness and foster healing. Dr. Webb has been featured on numerous radio and podcast shows, Fox Soul TV, the Illinois Times, and the TEDx stage. Dr. Webb identifies as an African American woman. Thank you so much for being here today.
Hello, thank you for having me. I'm excited for the conversation.
I am extremely excited. And I do want to ask, why are we telling people to quit compromising for comfort today?
Well, one, I realized that when we compromise for other people's comfort in particular, this is a way of protecting the status quo, especially since most often we're compromising for the comfort of people with more privilege than us. And I think as long as we continue to willingly compromise rather than standing in our truth uncompromisingly, then we are being complicit in maintaining the status quo. Beyond that, though, I believe that when we quit compromising for other people's comforts, we access an inner power. We get to know ourselves. We get to understand our self-worth at levels that just aren't possible if we're constantly stuffing ourselves into a box in order to not rock the boat or to make someone else feel comfortable.
I have so many questions following that, but I want to acknowledge like the words that you're using: status quo, rock the boat, stuffed into a box. Dr. Webb, what's the problem with that? Why can't I stick to the status quo? Why can't I be shoved into a box?
I like that question because you can. I think everyone has the free will choice. And I've often said too, because I do a lot of work with colorism healing and encouraging people to heal, but I often say sometimes though you need a little bit more time in your pain, or you need a little bit more time experiencing whatever your struggle is before you start the healing process. And more and more I acknowledge that sometimes we need to give people more space to compromise or to do the difficult thing until they're ready to heal, until they're ready to resist, until they're ready to advocate whatever their next phase will be for them. And so I think the alternative though of what comes out of not being stuffed into a box, of what comes out of not maintaining the status quo, and this is too, like if you want to feel better, if you want to create more opportunities, more equity, more joy, love, peace, prosperity for yourself and for people you love, and if you want it for the rest of the world, right? And so I emphasize if you wanted peace with the full acknowledgement that not everyone is going to want it. I think those things are great. and I want them, and I want them for as many people as possible. But I also give people the freedom not to want those things. I give people the freedom not to want to feel a sense of freedom in their life, right? And whatever their reason is for not wanting that, it is their free will choice, and they have the human autonomy to not feel like they want that. But for anyone who does want that, for anyone who's dissatisfied with the current state of their life and or the world at large, then that's when we have to choose to stop compromising. I hope that makes sense.
That makes so much sense, and it hurts. Like, it hurts me as a practitioner in this world, in this work, who is working towards the same kinds of things that you talked about that you're working towards. There are a lot of people I come across who are just like, no, I'm good. Like, this is keeping me safe. They are believing the lie that this is keeping me safe. Me code switching, me acting as if we are the same person, although our melanation levels are completely different.
Right.
Is frustrating to me. Like, them not acknowledging that is frustrating to me. How are you able to overcome that frustration when you meet other people who are not willing to move forward?
Ooh, because I've had a lot of time to figure out how to not feel frustrated. I think it goes back to respecting people's autonomy and humbling myself and knowing that I can't control other people's wants and desires, much less their actions, right? And even humbling myself in the sense that not everyone has to want the world that I want. Not everyone has to want the vision that I want, right? I think it's about putting my own perspective into perspective and realizing that as much as I love my perspective, it doesn't have to be a one size fits all perspective. And I think that diversity of thought, diversity of existence, thinking, ways of being, particularly in terms of things that don't do harm to others, right? I'm not talking about people who want to live and, do violence to other folks and that kind of thing. But so within the realm of not causing harm to others, I think that diversity of approach to life actually is kind of what makes the world textured and gives the world that nuance of color and like the spectrum of life itself. And so I don't begrudge that. However, in terms of when it does become frustrating, because I know that there is actual harm being done on the individual level, on the interpersonal level between two people, but also on the systemic level, on the society level. And so when someone's mindset or behavior patterns are contributing to that kind of harm, that's when it really frustrates me. And so one way I deal with that frustration is identifying how many other people I have not reached who are ready and willing to jump in for the cause, right? And so I might be face to face with one individual who's like, yeah, nah, I'm not gonna say anything. I'm not gonna do X, Y, Z, or I'm gonna continue to do X, Y, Z. Then I can think about, okay, this is one person, but there are 10 people on the next block who I haven't spoken to yet, who are ready to make that change, who are ready to make that commitment, who do want to have their perspective changed and just haven't been, made aware of certain things. And so I'm like, okay, these people here might not want it, but there are lots more people in the world I haven't connected with who really do want it. And so I'm going to go and actively and seek them. And so that helps to pull me away from trying to force it on the person who might be right in front of me, is knowing that there's a lot of ground to cover. And so I can't waste time. And I don't want to say that people are a waste of time, but I think trying to convince the unconvincible is a waste of time.
Ooh, I mean, we are all aware that this space is dedicated to boundaries. And I hear so many boundaries in that, just being able to regulate your energy and the acknowledgement that my energy is not being well spent with you, person who does not want to accept what I'm bringing to the table.
Absolutely.
When was the last time you had to let somebody know, hey, my energy is not being well spent here?
I'm laughing because just really practically speaking, and really recently, I let all of Instagram know that my energy was not being well spent there. And it's not about the people in my community on Instagram. It's more so the conditions created by Instagram, right? So Instagram creates the conditions and the parameters with which I'm able to engage and interact with that community. And that's what I am no longer interested in. And so, as I've been doing colorism healing just as my labor of love or my passion projects, my side gig, that kind of thing. But in January, I decided to go full time with it. And so and I'm not a naturally business minded or business oriented person, but having to make that switch from like, this is not just a hobby that I'm doing on the side. And if it, earns some extra cash here or there, it makes no difference. Like having to switch to, no, this is my sustenance now too. It's not just my love, it's also my bread and butter, has really forced me to lean into being very, very precise, clear, and intentional about how, when, where, why I spend time, spend energy, spend money, spend my resources, whether it be intellectual resources, my time resources, my emotional resources. And that's the thing too, a lot of the work that I was doing on Instagram, all of this work around colorism healing is not just my intellectual understanding and explanations of colorism. A lot of it is very emotional. One of the reasons it's emotional is because I've been so personally impacted by colorism. And so I'm not like, when I talk about colorism, I'm talking about something that has deeply impacted my life, my mind, my psychology, my emotional state throughout my life. And then also just, I think sometimes what other people ask of you is really heavy, right? And thinking about boundaries around how much emotional energy I'm giving in relationship to how I'm being refueled, or in proportion to what I am getting in terms of the sustenance. Because I do want to be here long term doing this work. And so I've really, really over the years have continued to refine what makes it sustainable. And the structure that was set up on Instagram currently is very unsustainable, and not enjoyable either. I think that's a thing. If I'm not, I want to do this work because it's important. A lot of it requires hard work, tough work, but I still want to have fun. I think it's okay to want to have fun creating content in particular, right? So yeah.
So many amazing words and insights that you're bringing into this space that I want people to acknowledge. Like, there are so many types of energy that you're giving into any environment that you in. You talked about educational energy, you talked about emotional energy, even the sharing your own experiences. Like, you could share the whole autobiography if you wanted to, but how much of that are you giving to a space that is not giving back? And acknowledging that the environment that you're sharing in is not sustainable for you as the individual that you are. When you noted to yourself that this environment is not sustainable for me, how long did it take for you to kind of implement new processes for your own sustainability?
In that particular instance, I'll be transparent. It wasn't a conscious choice initially to stop because I got sick. I got COVID, and I was doing weekly live streams on Instagram and just giving a lot to that audience and to that community. And I was like, I can't do a live stream this week because I can't, my voice is gone. I'm weak. I can barely stay awake. And so my body, I think, was manifesting something. And I also trust in my life. I trust in what my body is telling me. I trust what my emotions are telling me. And so having that sort of imposed break gave me the clarity. I was like, oh, this is kind of nice, not having to do a live stream this week. And I think I'm going to do the same thing next week. I was like, I'm going to just be off indefinitely from the live streams. And then so over the weeks, I was like, okay, this is, my life again, trying to show me something. And so I was able to reflect. I reflect a lot on things, very introverted and introspective. And it helped me to understand Instagram has started to lose its luster. And I realized I had been on sort of this hamster wheel of trying to grow your following and trying to increase engagement, and at the expense of peace of mind, at the expense of fulfillment and enjoyment, because I was doing all of this. And a lot of times people don't even realize it, but they're receiving a lot and they'll just keep going, right? And they don't think about, okay, well, I just received something from this person. What can I give in return? And it's not that they are intentionally doing that, right? It's up to us as the content creators to set up the dynamic that we want, right? Our audiences and the communities that we create don't know necessarily how to give back to us, or how we need them to interact with us or engage with us. So communicating that with them. And I've communicated with my audience too. I said, well, I'm still going to be on Instagram, but I'm pulling back. Right. So I communicated a boundary there with my Instagram audience, and I call them my gram fam, right? Because I think in a lot of ways, they've been my core community over the past 2 years or so. And so I want to not just ghost them, to use the current slang, and like throw up the deuces and be like, I'm out. But I want to explain to them and communicate to them the shift that's happening for me, like personally, but also professionally. And some of them are like, okay, well, it was good while it lasted. And others are like, well, because of why we started following you in the first place, the platform doesn't really matter to us anyway, right? We want this work to be sustainable just as much as you do.
Oh, I cannot thank you enough. But I do want to acknowledge the trusting in your body portion. For anybody who is new to this space, in 2018, I decided to take my own life after internalizing the unsafe behavior of a hostile workplace. And I just want to align that with you, because your body will fucking tell you when it is time to stop. You will get red flags before that, but at some point, your body is going to tell you that it is time to take a break and time to realign with what you are actually supposed to be doing here. I want to talk about, so thank you so much for bringing that here, but I do want to talk about the defining of relationships that I wrote down. You have to tell the dynamic what you want. If you don't tell the dynamic, it will tell you. Instagram be telling you a lot of stuff. So you need to tell Instagram a thing or two about the relationship you want to have. When you define those relationships, people act accordingly. Like some of those people were like, all right, I didn't like that's right. Good. And then some of those people are like, no, I am here for the long haul. I came here for the education and the sustenance you are providing me. I love that so much. When people define relationships with you, whether it be good or bad, what are you learning about the spaces you're in, or what do you take from that?
So you mean when other people are communicating their needs and boundaries to me?
Yes.
So one, I have to acknowledge that it's rare. And I think that's why your platform is so important. Because I think still, culturally speaking, as a culture writ large, we still don't really understand the need to set parameters and establish norms and expectations and like say what you need. And if the other person is like, yeah, I'm not really interested in that, then like, okay, we know what it is now, right? Like we can act accordingly, like you said. I still think we have so much ground to cover as a society and as a culture. And so when just that bare minimum, I think I saw a recent LinkedIn post that you made about the bare minimum. So when like that bare minimum is happening, I'm like, okay, well, it's bare minimum, but they are light years ahead of so many other people and spaces and places I've been in, right? And so that sort of informs me that, okay, this is a space and or a person that might at least be willing to learn, right? Because they've learned enough to say that. They've learned enough to be communicative. They've learned enough to try on emotional intelligence. And so for me, I'm more willing to interact and engage because it's a signal that they're at least listening, right? And you can't always control how the dynamic plays out from there. But if I know that you're at least a person who listens and considers and reflects and adjusts according to new information, then I can trust that, even if ultimately we still part ways or whatever happens.
I can trust that. And I mean, that's another word that we don't hear often, or when we do hear it, it's pertaining to, I don't know, it's very ambiguous at this point, what people believe trust to be or what trust is built on. And what I love that you're bringing into the space is that it's for the individual. Every single person needs to define that in the beginning of every single individual relationship, what it looks like to be trusted in this relationship. Have you had to define trust recently with anyone?
I'm laughing because the things that immediately pop into my mind are not necessarily what I would like intellectually say. But the first thing that popped into my mind was myself. And that's a very touchy subject because I was reading some of the questions beforehand about boundaries. And one thing I've learned a lot in recent years is boundaries with myself. And so boundaries with myself. And, so Brene Brown has a mixed reviews from people, but I have to acknowledge that I have learned things from her work. And one of the, I think, most profound things I've learned because I've seen its impact in my life is we can't trust ourselves if we betray our own boundaries. And so just like if someone else betrays your boundary, that creates distrust, right? We are less likely to trust people who continue to betray our own boundaries. But there have been moments of self-betrayal. This is why when I talk to people about colorism healing too, I talk about self-forgiveness being so important because there have been times in my life when I have betrayed myself. Compromising for other people's comfort is an example of how we can betray ourselves. So someone else wants me to dress a certain way or speak a certain way or do my hair a certain way. And so I follow suit, even if it's not what I really want. We're betraying ourselves when we do that. And so there's a need to say, Sarah, because I'm a Gemini, so there's already two of me, but I very much talk to and of myself as being a multiples. And so I say there's this like umbrella me that is kind of looking out for all of the other me's. And let's just say my inner child, right? To use more simplified language. So my inner child is looking up to me and saying, can I trust you to take care of me? Can I trust you to stand up for me? Can I trust you to protect me? And there is, a need to say, Sarah, I trust that you will get us through this situation. I trust that you will not compromise on your boundaries. You will not compromise on your core values because I regret saying it. There have been times when I have compromised. Now, granted, a lot of it was due to lies from the other party or like manipulation or grooming, right? There's so many things involved, but there have been times when I had an internal boundary and I didn't maintain it. So that's also something I talk about a lot too, is not only communicating the boundary, but actually like defending it. Once you've laid it out there, you got to protect it because there are people who will try it. Just because we say that this is a boundary doesn't mean everyone is going to immediately back off. And that's, an unfortunate part of our reality, but that muscle, it's like a muscle we have to build, right? Is one, learning to recognize when we need boundaries, having the courage to set the boundaries, and then having the strength to maintain those boundaries. And then I think that it starts with me not compromising on my boundary. Because again, there are so many external entities and people and organizations who will be more than happy to cross my boundaries. I can't let myself be the first one to breach my own boundary. And I hope that makes sense. I can give a more specific example if necessary, but
no, that makes hella fucking sense. Like that makes so much sense. There's so much work that has to be done within ourselves before we kind of go into the world and like, yeah, I'm good on boundaries. I'm good. I'm so good on it. You probably are good, that's for sure. But the acknowledgement of the external factors that can come at you anytime you set an external boundary is why you need such good internal trust and internal boundaries with yourself. Like the relationship with yourself has to come first, or the relationships that you go into with other people, whether professionally or personally, they're just not, I mean, they're not going to go. They're just not going to
Yeah.
go. One of the things I would love for you to acknowledge in this space is why colorism, which is one of the external factors that could get you to compromising your boundaries, is so important to you.
Mm. Ooh, it's so deep. You would think as much as I talk about colorism, I would like just have these pat answers. But every time someone asks me a question, even if it's an echo of previous questions, I'm like, So why is colorism so important to me as an issue?
Mm.
It's definitely because I witnessed how it diminished my own sense of self-worth. And I witnessed how it over as a child, right? Because I started experiencing colorism as a child. Most people do, experience some form of colorism as a child. And the times that I betrayed my own boundaries, the times when I didn't trust myself, resulted from a lack of self-worth. And that lack of self-worth is a direct result of colorism. Now, colorism isn't the only issue I had to deal with in life, but it was a big one. And I really struggled with self-worth. And so I'll say this too, this is despite being like the self-confidence, self-love, ambassador. And I was telling someone else recently, I was like, certain relationships that I had in the past like 5 years made me realize like, oh, okay, maybe I don't have as much self-worth as I thought. Because I said this in a recent live stream, I was working on self-love, working on self-worth, almost like in a laboratory setting, right? So the experiment always works perfectly in a lab, in my bedroom, in my journal, of course. I'm confident and I love myself. But then you go out into the real world, you're not in that pristine, sort of hermetically sealed laboratory environment anymore. And all of a sudden life is like, okay, let's put it to the test, right? Let's do a trial run. Let's see if this actually works, like in life, like if the application is actually there. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, like I had the theory, I had the lab tested self-love and self-worth, but when it was tested in the real world, when it was tested within the context of real relationships and tested within the context of a real workplace or, all these things, I realized it was a muscle that I still had a ways to go before it was really strong enough to depend on. And so colorism is something I feel I can speak directly to, because anything can be a source of that for someone else, right? For some people it's sizeism, for some people it's ableism, transphobia, so a lot of these social problems can have a similar impact on other people depending on their identity. And because of my particular identity and experiences, I feel like I can speak to colorism in a way that does create change, both for individual people, but also in communities and in cultures.
Thank you so much for being so specific about the harm that is being caused to you and so many people across the world. I appreciate it because there are a lot of people that don't have the vocabulary needed to name that harm. And so they're just like, what the fuck was that? Like, why am I being treated differently in this space?
Yeah.
Like, what is going on here? What do you believe it is important to be able to name specific harm being caused to you?
I was just, yep. I was just thinking as you were talking just now, like thinking about that child, my childhood, that's where I was. I was like, I see, am I the only one who sees this? Or am I making this up? Do other people notice this thing happening? Because also colorism is one of those things people don't want to talk about. So it's that duality of like, not only do I have the vocabulary for this, but I can't even, broach the subject to try and gain the vocabulary, to try and get some understanding. I can't look to the adults to say, I'm describing an event. Can you tell me what that is? Because nobody wanted to hear it. So not only do you not have the vocabulary, but you don't have access to getting it, to coming into the vocabulary or the understanding. And so when I did discover colorism, it was that is really literally life-changing, right? I'm here today because someone else spoke publicly about colorism, spoke publicly about this issue. And that's also why I do it, because I was like, seeing someone else do it changed my life. So maybe if I do it, I can help to change other people's lives as well. But that being able to name it, even just being able to name your feelings, is if you can start there, right? So sometimes you don't always know what's happening to you, but you can try to name the way it makes you feel. And I think that's like a good first step. So if you don't have the vocabulary for the external situation that's going on, try to develop, like expand your emotional vocabulary, right? So let's say event happens and you feel something. Identify, is it sadness? Is it anger? Is it frustration? Is it disappointment? Is it joy? Is it peace? Is it fear? And so I think those kinds of feeling words and emotion words can be a good place to start. And then once you're able to name the emotion, you're still at least able to identify if this is a toxic situation, right? So even if you can't name why it's toxic or like what the specific toxic dynamic is, you know that it's toxic because it makes you afraid, or it makes you like angry, or it's crossed the boundary of some sort. So I think, but even that as a culture, we still don't have, I think before we teach children how to, do science experiments, we should teach them how to name their feelings. You're crying, okay, but crying can result from multiple different kinds of feelings. Crying could result from anger just as much as it results from sadness or disappointment or grief, right? And so really as humans, learning to develop that emotional vocabulary, I think is a skill, a survival skill. It's almost like, a necessity to survive just on the physical plane, much less to thrive emotionally and mentally.
I hope everybody is taking away so much from this. I have written so many notes down, and I just want to emphasize once again that these taboo subjects, or these subjects that people are trying to tuck away, gatekeep, and like, well, don't talk about it unless you have this, this, and this lined up, and so many experiments that you've already done. But you are enough. You have experienced it. Talk about it so that other people can talk about it, so that somebody else's life can be saved from the conversation. Oh, let me not break out into tears. Thank you so much for acknowledging that some of these conversations are not being had, but they sure the fuck do need to be had. So thank you so much. One of the things, okay, actually, hold on. Okay, one of the things I want for you to say in this space, at least so that they can be acknowledged, is could you say the name of the person, if you have space, could you say the name of the person that talked about it before you started talking about it?
Yes, it's a very popular name. It was Bill Duke. So in 2011, he and Bill Duke and Chanson D. Berry produced the documentary Dark Girls. And it was kind of this moment where I was like, they said it. They're talking about that thing that we're not supposed to talk about. Somebody's saying it out loud, and they have a pretty big platform on which to say it. And I was like, maybe, because it's also like someone else goes first and you're like, okay, maybe it's safe for me to come out. Maybe it's safe for me to like dip my toe in the water because I saw someone else make a splash. So it was the Bill Duke, Chanson D. Berry documentary, Dark Girls.
That is so awesome. Thank you so much. And for anybody who needs that, I'll make sure to put the link in the show notes when this is published. Oh, I've learned so much from this episode, so I cannot thank you enough. Are there, for the people who want to go into their office tomorrow or the next week, or are going to build up their emotional intelligence to have that trusting conversation with themselves, what would be the top 3 tips that you would share with them about having these conversations?
I think that last comment you just made is my very, very first tip. And it's always my first tip, even if people don't want to hear it, is to get the healthiest relationship with yourself as you humanly can get, as you can humanly muster, is to develop that sense of trust and deep, intimate connection to your authentic self. Know thyself. The second thing I would say is to asking, normalize asking, right? Whether it's asking permission or asking people what their preferences are, asking people what their pronouns are, normalize asking. And the other thing I'll say is respect and promote autonomy wherever possible. Going back to my earlier comment, this is not the autonomy to cause harm, right? But respecting people's autonomy. I'll give a brief example. When I was teaching high school, I think the public education system is based off of the prison system. And so there's, especially for Black and brown students. And so there's this idea that students have to be perfectly still and they have to be like these little soldiers almost. And so people would come into my classroom and I have a student standing up at their desk, or like, students didn't have to ask permission to like stand up and walk to the trash can, right? Because there's something fundamental about bodily autonomy. And they're not causing a distraction. They're not, a threat to anybody if they want to stand up and do their work, And so I just say promote autonomy. And that's a boundary. That's not micromanaging other people's movements and how they live and work. I think is respecting their boundaries and normalizing that as a culture of, people have the freedom to have their boundaries, but also I think it's both setting the boundary and then respecting other people's boundaries is the practice.
And once again, Dr. Webb, these are things that people are so not used to. I as soon as you were talking, I was thinking about how everybody had to go remote, and those people were just not ready. They were just like, I can't see you. I can't be able to breathe on you. I can't see if you finished the thing I asked you to do 5 seconds ago. And those people were just not ready. Honey, baby, whoever you are, if you are listening to this and you feel uncomfortable, get the fuck ready. We are done. We have quit compromising for your comfort, and we will do so no longer. Dr. Webb, thank you so much. Are there any last minute sprinkles you'd like to share with the audience before we go today?
Yes, I would like to say, especially if you're interested in learning more about colorism, please do check out colorismhealing.com. You can find colorism healing on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Instagram.
Yay, please check it out. And that will also be in the show notes. But until next time, please keep setting those boundaries and saying absolutely not to everything unaligned. We will see you next time. Bye. Bye, Sam.
Bye.